under the red light of the Velkar. Sun, the capital city, shimmered like a jewel in the dust towers of glass and stone rising. High into the thin air, transport ships weaving between them like silver insects. People filled the landing, platforms whispering among themselves as the great diplomatic cruiser came down on a wave of blue flame. The heat rolled across the crowd, but they stayed watching, eager to see the famous negotiator sent by the Galactic Council to stop the war. The cruiser touched down with a low hum, the landing ramp slowly unfolding, and every camera in the city turning to capture the moment. Tall alien guards in ceremonial armor stepped forward first, their scales gleaming gold and green. Then came Diplomat. Varnick, long and elegant, his robes flowing like water, each step graceful, his face unreadable. The crowd gave a low murmur of respect, some even bowed, but the sound changed when they saw who walked behind him. A human, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing no armor, no heavy weapons, just dark, plain clothing and a small black device at his belt. His hair was close cropped, his face calm, eyes moving across the platform as if measuring every person. Every shadow. The crowd whispered a human, here impossible. The Velkar did not trust humans, the Droon despised them. What was this man doing at the side of one of the most powerful diplomats in the galaxy? Some laughed softly in the alien way, a rumbling hiss as if to say, "This is a joke, look at him, he has no claws, no horns, no energy rifle in his hands, just soft flesh and brittle bone. A single blow would crush him. Why would the council send such a creature to guard a man like Varnick?" Others narrowed their eyes, not laughing at all, their gaze sharp. Calculating, trying to understand what they were seeing, Captain Elias Ward walked with slow, measured steps, his boots making almost no sound. He did not look at the cameras, did not acknowledge the crowd. He was scanning every rooftop, every archway. The reflection of the sun on the distant towers, the sudden movement of a bird across the sky, the shifting stance of a Velkar guard, who seemed just a little too tense to be part of the ceremony. He filed it all away in the quiet space of his mind. The air smelled faintly metallic, as it always did on Velkar Prime. A scent that spoke of the dust storms that swept down from the high deserts and the endless work of the smelters on the horizon. But underneath it, Elias caught something else. The faint chemical trace of plasma fuel, too close to recent, not from the cruiser. He knew the scent of his own ship. No, this was from somewhere nearby, something small. Diplomat Varnick stepped forward onto the city's main causeway, raising his hands for silence. His voice carried far and smooth. "Citizens of Velkar Prime, we come here today not as enemies, not as conquerors, but as allies who wish to see the end of bloodshed." But even as the crowd listened, Elias saw movement near the rear of the plaza, a figure in dark clothing slipping between the line of spectators, head lowered, hands hidden under the folds of their robe. He kept walking in rhythm with Varnick, not changing pace, not making a sound. His eyes tracked the figure as they moved closer, weaving through the crowd. The man or woman's movements were wrong too. Precise, too careful, like someone used to hiding their presence. Then Elias saw it, the shimmer in the air just above the person's shoulder, the faint bending of light. The way a knife in water distorts the world around it. It was a stealth field, a bad one, just visible if you knew what to look for. He breathed out slow, his mind moving through possibilities. To many people, to draw his weapon, even his small sidearm, would cause panic. The assassin would strike and vanish before security could react, so he let his steps shift slightly, closing the space between himself and Varnick, so that when the moment came, he would be in the right place to move the figure. In the crowd stopped, turning slightly, their hidden hand rising. Varnick kept speaking, unaware. The shimmer above the assassin's shoulder flickered for just a fraction of a second, and in that moment, Elias moved. It was fast, but quiet, a single step. A twist of his arm and his hand was on the assassin's wrist, fingers clamping down like iron. He turned the motion into a stumble, pulling the figure forward as if they had tripped on their own feet. The crowd barely noticed, only a few closest gasped. The weapon still hidden, never fired. The shimmer above them collapsing as the stealth field failed. Elias pushed the would-be killer into the hands of two Velkar guards, speaking low so no one else could hear. "Check their robes, check the inner lining." The guards obeyed, finding a compact plasma blade designed to cut through armor in seconds. Varnick did not miss a word of his speech, his tone never changing, but Elias saw the brief flicker of understanding in the diplomat's eyes. He knew exactly how close he had just come to die in the crowd. Continued to listen, unaware that history had shifted by a hair's breadth in that instant. The assassin was dragged away, hissing in a language Elias did not know, the guards' faces unreadable. One of them gave him a brief look, a flicker of something between respect and unease. Then they were gone, disappearing into the security hallways under the plaza. Elias stepped back to his place behind Varnick, his breathing slow, his mind replaying the shimmer, the exact distance the assassin had traveled before striking this. It was no random attempt. This was planned in time to the second the Droon would deny it, of course, and the Velkar would blame. Human manipulation, but Elias knew better. This was a sign that the peace talks would be more dangerous than the war itself. The speech ended with polite applause, the kind that meant nothing. Varnick turned, leading the way into the great crystalline doors of the council hall. The crowd was already dispersing, but Elias could feel eyes still on him. Not from the streets, not from the balconies, but from somewhere. Higher and farther away, he could not see them, but he could feel their focus like a cold weight on his back inside the hall. The air was cool, the light dim filtered through high stained glass walls that told the history of Velkar Prime battles treaties. Betrayals 1,000 years of shifting alliances. The room smelled faintly of old paper and polished stone, and Elias walked through it like a man stepping into deep water. Varnick spoke with officials in low voices, their tones polite but tense. Elias stayed silent but alert, watching the way certain counselors kept glancing at him, as if measuring the worth of the human who had just stopped an assassination without firing a single shot. To them it was strange. Unnerving humans were supposed to be impulsive, loud, easy to read. This one was none of those things. The first meeting began, the voices rising and polite. Argument: Velkar, accusing Droon of aggression, Droon countering with lists of Velkar provocations, old anger dressed in formal words. The room was heavy with the sound of it. Elias stood behind Varnick, his gaze sliding slowly across the chamber, the tall windows, the deep shadows in the corners, the quiet attendants with their lowered eyes. He caught a small flicker near the top of the chamber where the stained glass met the wall, a faint glint of something metallic far too small for decoration. It was gone in an instant, but Elias had already memorized its position: a sensor, perhaps, camera, perhaps, something worse. The meeting dragged on hour after hour, until at last it broke for the day, the officials dispersing to private rooms to prepare. For the next session, Varnick walked beside Elias down the long marble corridor, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "You saw it too, did you not?" Elias nodded without slowing. "Yes," and it was not the only thing. Varnick gave a faint smile. Not of amusement, but of recognition. "Then we both know these talks will be more dangerous than any battlefield you have ever walked." Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then we had better make sure I walk every one of them first." Outside, the sun had shifted toward the horizon, casting long shadows across Velkar Prime. The city glowed in its strange alien light. The air carried the deep hum of industry, the distant roar of ships moving toward the upper docks. Elias looked out over the skyline for a long moment, then turned back toward the hall. Somewhere in this city, the next attempt was already being planned, and the next time they might not miss. He walked on, silent, steady, unhurried, every step a quiet promise to anyone watching that if they tried again, they would not get a second chance. The rain came without warning, fine and cold, drifting down from the upper clouds of Velkar Prime until it streaked across the glass roofs and stone streets in silver lines. The city seemed quieter. Under the wet sky, its neon signs blurring into hazy colors reflected on the black pavement. Traffic slowed overhead, the hum of skimmers softened to a low murmur. Somewhere far off, the sound of deep thunder rolled, but it was not the kind that came from clouds. Captain Elias Ward stood at the wide window of the council guest quarters, his arms folded, his eyes scanning the courtyard below. Security teams in gold armor patrolled in pairs, their movements crisp, rehearsed, but Elias knew they were watching the wrong places. They looked at doorways, at streets, at the obvious approach points, never up, never into the spaces between shadows where a professional would move. He had learned long ago that most people could not see danger unless it stood in front of them. Behind him, Diplomat Varnick's voice was calm but sharp as he spoke to a line of officials on the Come display. The words were in Velkar's speech, a flowing melodic tone, but the meaning was clear enough from the diplomats. Posture, the assassination attempt, had made its way into quiet conversation among the council members. Already each side accusing the other, each certain this was proof of bad faith. The room smelled faintly of alien incense, a thin blue curl of smoke rising from the burner in the corner. The Velkar used it to calm the mind. Elias ignored it. His focus was on the lower edge of the courtyard, where a figure in a dark cloak moved. Slowly along the fence line, they were not dressed like the local workers, too stiff in the shoulders, and their head turned too often for someone simply passing. Elias let his gaze drift past them as if uninterested, but he kept track of every step the figure took. They paused near a service gate, resting a hand lightly on the lock. The motion was small but deliberate. Then the figure moved on, vanishing behind a line of parked supply carts. He waited for them to reappear, but they never did. He stepped back from the window, turning toward Varnik. "We have a problem," he said. Simple. Varnik ended his call and looked at him, the usual calm in his face, but a faint crease between the eyes already. "I take it not one of your instincts this time?" Elias shook his head. "Someone's testing the perimeter, and they're good. They avoided every sightline on the way." And Varnik considered for a moment. "You think this is another attempt?" "Not yet," Elias said. "This is preparation." An hour later, Elias walked the outer edge of the council complex, rain dripping from the brim of his hood. He moved past guards, who nodded politely, but gave him the wary look all aliens seem to reserve for humans in places of power. His boots made no sound on the stone walkways. The sound of the rain covered everything. He reached the service gate and crouched, studying the lock. It was a standard Velkar model, but the faint scratch marks near the base told him someone had attached a bypass tool recently. The scratches were fresh, less than an hour old. He traced the marks with one gloved finger, then looked toward the alley beyond it, narrow enough for one person to move quickly. Elias did not return to the guest quarters. Instead, he took the long way around, following the alley to where it curved into the marketplace. The stalls were closing for the night, merchants packing away strange fruits, glowing minerals, fabrics that shimmered under the light. He walked past them without slowing eyes on the crowd. That was when he saw it again, the shimmer, a faint ripple in the air just ahead between two stalls. His pulse slowed instead of quickening. He had learned long ago that speed killed patience, saved lives. The shimmer moved, weaving between the aliens and the marketplace, never touching anyone, never brushing against a stall. It was headed toward the far exit of the market. Elias kept his pace steady, letting the distance close one step at a time. The shimmer reached the archway of the exit and paused, just long enough for him to be certain it was not random heat distortion. Then it vanished, no sound, no trace. Walked to the archway, scanning the street. Beyond, nothing but the slow flow of rain on black stone and the glow of distant towers still. He knew what he had seen. Someone was here, moving under a cloaking field, just like the assassin in the plaza by the time he returned to the council complex. Varnik was waiting in the main hall, a faint glint in his eye. "You saw them again, didn't you?" Elias nodded. "They're not trying to kill you tonight, but they're mapping this place, every exit, every blind spot. They're planning something bigger." Varnik, so voice dropped lower. "Then we have even less time than I thought, and more enemies. Then we can." Elias looked toward the tall windows, the rain still falling like thin silver knives through the night sky. Somewhere out there in the wet streets, someone was preparing for war, and he intended to be ready when they came. The council chamber was built like a cathedral, vast, high-ceilinged, with stained glass walls that caught the red light of the Velkar sun and fractured it into 1,000 shards. The air smelled faintly of heated stone and the sweet metallic scent of the water. Vaporizers hidden in the corners. It was quiet, except for the low hum of the translation systems and the steady echo of footsteps as delegates took their places. The war was close enough now that every smile in the room looked like a mass captain. Elias Ward stood behind diplomat Varnik as the Velkar High Command entered, their movements precise, their gold armor catching the light. The Druun delegation arrived next, tall and angular, their pale chitin armor patterned with black and silver, their eyes like shards of ice. The two groups did not look at each other, except for brief, sharp glances that carried the weight of centuries of hate. The council leader began to speak, a deep, slow voice filling the hall, but Elias was not listening to the words. His attention was on the small movements, the tilt of a guard's head, The twitch of a clawed hand, the slight lag between a translation and the reaction of the one hearing. At every detail was a possible warning. His gaze moved to the far wall where two Velkar aides were speaking quietly, their eyes flicking toward the human more often than they should have. He noted the way one of them touched the sleeve of his robe. Twice in the same motion, a nervous signal, perhaps a habit. Perhaps something else. The talks began with accusations, Velkar generals accusing Droon fleets of border incursions, the Droon counters sharp-clipped, each side piling words. Like weapons in a slow, deliberate duel, Varnik listened with his usual calm. But Elias saw the faint stiffness in his shoulders. He knew the diplomat was holding the conversation on a razor's edge. Then Elias saw something that cut through the noise, a movement at the high balcony above the chamber. Not a guard, not an aide. A shape too still for either. It was in the shadow of the stained glass where the light barely reached a faint glint of metal near the figure's hands. No one else was looking up. He moved 2 steps closer to Varnik and spoke in a voice just low enough for the diplomat to hear. You're already surrounded there and here. Varnik's eyes did not move, but Elias saw the tiniest shift and focused. Council leader paused, sensing the tension. The Velkar general turned sharply toward Elias. What? Do you mean? The human's voice stayed calm. There are at least 4 armed infiltrators in this building. 1 above us, 2 in the eastern access hall, and 1 on the lower maintenance level. You can't see them because you're not looking for the right things. The Droon delegate hissed an insult, calling it human paranoia, but the high command signaled their guards to fan out, orders crackling in their cums. A ripple of movement swept the chamber. In less than a minute, shouts echoed from the eastern hall. 2 figures in dark armor breaking from cover, weapons in hand, one of them dropping instantly under the blast of a guard's pulse rifle. The other tackled before they could fire. Above them, the balcony figure slipped backward, vanishing into the shadows before anyone could stop them, and from below came the faint sound of metal on metal, as if someone were trying to force a hatch closed. The chamber erupted in noise, Velkar shouting orders, Droon accusing humans of staging the entire thing. Elias ignored them, moving for the eastern hall where the captured infiltrator was being restrained. His armor, unfamiliar black plates etched with thin silver lines. Number Velkar, no Droon markings. He crouched in front of the prisoner, who stared at him with cold, unreadable eyes. Who sent you? The alien said nothing. Elias's hand closed on the edge of the armor, his voice low enough for only the prisoner to hear. I will find out, and when I do, your employer will wish they'd chosen someone else. Guards dragged the infiltrator away. Varnik approached, his expression unreadable. Your timing was precise. Elias looked back toward the balcony where the first figure had escaped. That was only the first layer. There's more, and if we keep talking like this, we'll never see the second coming. Varnik glanced toward the council members, still arguing in heated voices, then to Elias and gave a small nod. Handle it. You have 24 hours, Elias. Returned toward the doors, already thinking in maps. In routes and traps. The war outside was dangerous, but the one inside? These walls was worse, and it had already begun. The city had gone quiet under a heavy midnight sky, rain falling in fine silver threads across the rooftops, the lights of Velkar Prime turning the wet streets into rivers of color. Captain Elias Ward moved alone through the empty market district, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He could feel the eyes on him, though. The streets looked empty, eyes that waited for him to slip, eyes that measured the way he walked, the pace he kept, the way his hands stayed loose at his sides. Stalls around him were dark now, their canvas awnings sagging under the weight of rain. The smell of damp metal and spice hung in the air. He passed a shuttered fruit stand, the bright purple skin of one fallen orb glistening under a neon sign, its light flickering with each drop of rain that struck it, a soft rhythm that almost masked the faint scrape of metal somewhere behind. He kept walking, not turning his head, his route taking him to the open square at the center of the district. Here the buildings fell away, leaving a wide, flat space, surrounded by glass awnings and narrow alleys, perfect places to watch from, perfect places to hide. He stopped in the center of the square, standing under the glow of a tall street lamp, his shadow stretching long and thin across the wet stone. Somewhere in the darkness, a footstep shifted. Too careful to be casual, he waited. Breathing slow, feeling the air around him, the sound of the rain on metal, faint hum of a distant skimmer, then a flicker caught his eye at the edge of one alley. The light bending just slightly, a shimmer, in the shape of a man moving toward him under a cloak of distortion. Elias did not move until the shimmer stepped closer. Then his hand slipped to the small device on his belt. His thumb brushing a recessed switch. A high pitch vibrated through the air just under hearing range. The shimmer flickered and failed, revealing the tall, angular figure beneath dark armor. Slick with rain, eyes glowing faintly in the light, the assassin froze for only a second. Before darting back into the shadows, Elias was already moving his boots, splashing through shallow puddles as he gave chase. The assassin's movements were quick and clean. Leaping over crates, weaving between market stalls, Elias stayed close, never rushing enough to lose his precision. They cut through a narrow street lined with closed glass front shops, the reflections in the windows warping their shapes into ghosts. The assassin ducked through a side door into a long service corridor, dimly lit and smelling of old oil. Elias followed without hesitation. The corridor ended in a locked gate. The assassin spun to face him, a short curved blade sliding into their hand, glowing with pale energy. Elias shifted his stance, his eyes never leaving the other's hands, the rainwater dripping from his coat onto the floor in slow, steady drops. The assassin lunged, the blade sweeping toward his chest. Elias stepped inside the arc, catching the attacker's wrist and twisting the blade free in one smooth motion. He drove his elbow into the alien's side, forcing the breath from their lungs and sending them staggering against the wall in seconds. The blade was at the assassin's throat. "Who sent you?" Elias asked, voice low enough to be almost a growl. The alien's eyes narrowed. "You're too late. The fleet is already moving 3 days, no." To the voice was sharp with satisfaction. Elias tightened his grip, then released it, letting the assassin drop to the floor. By the time Velkar security arrived following the signal from Elias's belt beacon, the assassin had been stripped of weapons and bound. The guards took one look at the prisoner's armor and exchanged glances. No markings, no allegiance, at least none they would speak of back. In the council hall, Elias stood before Varnik, the rain still on his coat. The diplomat's expression was one of quiet calculation. "Well," Varnik said. 2 days, Elias corrected. Voice flat, "Maybe less, and when they come, they won't be here to talk." The diplomat gave a slow nod. "Then it seems we had better make sure they don't get the war they want." Elias glanced toward the tall windows where the rain still fell in steady silver lines. Somewhere out there, ships were already moving through dark space, closing in on Velkar Prime, and he knew when they arrived there would be no time left for words. The first warning came not from the Velkar military, but from the deep vibration in the air, the kind you felt in your bones before you heard it. Captain Elias Ward stood on the balcony outside the council chamber and watched the sky turn from red to black as massive shadows slid across the sun. The Droon fleet had arrived earlier than anyone expected. From horizon to horizon, the ships hung like a wall of steel, their hulls reflecting thin bands of light, each one bristling with weapons capable of cutting a city in half in seconds. Sirens wailed across Velkar Prime. Civilians poured into shelters, the diplomatic district locking down as if heavy doors could stop what was coming inside the chamber. The council dissolved into shouting. The Velkar generals ordering defense batteries powered up the Droon, delegates barking demands that the Velkars surrender. At once Elias ignored them all and stepped to Varnik's side. He leaned in close. 3 minutes, no more. Varnik's eyes flicked toward him, a question in the faintest movement of his brow. "Can you do it?" Elias nodded. "If you keep them talking." He left without another word, moving through the hallways at a steady pace, his boots silent against the polished stone. 2 security officers tried to stop him, but he flashed the override code. The council had given only to its most trusted agents. The doors to the secure hangar slid open, revealing a small stealth shuttle, matte black with no visible markings. Elias slid into the pilot's seat, fingers moving across the controls, the engines whispering to life. He launched low, skimming the rooftops until the city fell away. Beneath him, the massive shapes of the Droon warships filling the sky ahead. Closest ship was a command carrier, its hull covered in weapon mounts and communications arrays. Elias brought the shuttle in under its sensor range, slipping through a maintenance channel along the keel. He set the autopilot to hold position, then moved into the narrow airlock at the rear, pulling a compact pulse rifle from its reek. Inside the carrier, the air was cold and dry, the walls a mix of dark alloy and glowing control strips. He moved fast, silent through the corridors, passing a drone crew who didn't see him until it was far too late. He planted a small black device at the base of the first weapons array, then another in the communications hub, each one a shaped EMP charge tuned to burn out targeting systems without touching life support. When he reached the bridge, he found the Droon Admiral standing before a massive tactical display, pale armor gleaming under the lights. The alien turned slowly, eyes narrowing at the sight of the human alone. No guards, no squad, no army. "What are you doing here?" The voice was low like stone. Grinding. Elias stepped forward calmly. "I have control of your weapons, all of them, every cannon, every torpedo, every orbital strike array. The devices I've planted will wipe them in less than a second. Stand down, or you will be defenseless against the Velkar fleets outside." The Admiral stared at him, unblinking, the silence stretching thin between them. "You're bluffing." Elias reached to his wrist display, pressed a single key, and one of the carriers forward. Cannons exploded in a burst of sparks and smoke through the bridge viewport. 3 minutes. Varnick's voice came faint through his earpiece. "Make your choice now." The Admiral's jaw tightened, his clawed hand curling. Then he spoke into the comm channel to all ships. "Disengage, pull back to high orbit now." From the surface of Velkar Prime, the Droon fleet's retreat looked like the tide pulling away from shore. The war that had been seconds from beginning was over in the span of 3 minutes. Elias left the carrier, the devices already counting down to auto-destruct. Once he was clear, the shuttle slipped back through the atmosphere, returning to the city below. When he stepped out onto the council balcony again, the rain had stopped, the streets below eerily silent. Varnick was there watching the sky. "You did it." Elias said nothing, only nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon, because he knew fleets like that did not retreat without a reason to come back. The war was over. At least that was what the official reports said. Velkar and Droon leaders had signed the ceasefire documents in front of the Galactic Council cameras. The news feeds replayed the handshake over and over, calling it a historic victory, calling it the end of an age of blood. But Captain Elias Ward stood at the edge of the council balcony, looking down at the streets of Velkar Prime, and knew the silence felt wrong. The city below was still the usual glow of neon from the market sectors, still shimmered on wet streets, still air cars drifted along their lanes, but the movement felt slower, the voices quieter, the crowds smaller, as if the entire planet was holding its breath. He could feel the tension, not in the noise of the city, but in what was missing. No celebration, no laughter, just the hum of power lines and the low thrum of patrol ships passing overhead. Behind him, Diplomat Varnick spoke in a low voice, with the Velkar Council leader, both of them standing over a projection table where maps of the outer sectors hovered in pale blue light. "The ceasefire is holding," Varnick said, but Elias could hear the weight in his tone. "The Droon fleets have moved back to high orbit, but they have not gone home." One of the Velkar aides entered carrying a slim silver case and set it on the table. Without a word, the council leader opened it, revealing a compact holo projector. Inside, a single message pulsed in. Bright red, it was not in Velkar or Droon script. It was something older. Varnick touched the control, and the message unfolded in the air phase. "To begin soon." The words hung between them like a shadow. Varnick's gaze shifted to Elias, who stepped closer and studied the projection. His voice was quiet enough that only Varnick heard. "This isn't over, it's only changing shape. Security teams are still clearing the upper levels of the council hall." When Elias walked the perimeter himself, some of the guards glanced at him with the uneasy respect that came after watching one man end a war in 3 minutes. Others avoided his eyes entirely, as if unsure what he was capable of, or if they wanted to know. In one of the narrow service corridors, he found a fresh scorch mark on the wall, not from weapons fire, but from an overcharged data splice. Someone had tapped into the council's private network from inside the building. The lock on the nearest maintenance hatch was undamaged, meaning whoever did it had the correct access codes. Elias crouched beside the mark, tracing the edge of the burn with his fingertip. The scent of singed wiring still faint in the air. He stood and moved on, following the pattern of access. patches until he reached a blind corner where the wall panels were slightly misaligned. He pressed a hand to the seam, and the panel slid back, revealing a small hidden alcove. Inside lay a portable rig still active, still transmitting on a narrowband signal. He cut the feed and pulled the unit free, slipping it into his coat, then sealed the panel again. No alarm had gone off, which meant the person who placed it was someone the Council trusted. That thought was more dangerous than any warship in orbit. When he returned to the main chamber, Varnick was waiting alone. The others having left for the evening. "You found something," Elias set the rig on the table. "Someone inside is still working against you, against the Council. They've been sending data off-world since before the ceasefire was signed." Varnick's eyes narrowed. "You think it's the Drune?" Elias shook his head. "No, this isn't Drune tech, and it's not Velkar either. This is third faction equipment built for long-term covert ops, and whoever they are, they wanted the war, but not for the reasons. We thought the room was quiet except for the faint hum of the projector still displaying the red message. Phase 2 begins soon." Elias looked at it for a long moment, then at the rain streaking the windows beyond the hall. "We want a pause, not peace. And pauses don't last." Somewhere above the city, a Drune battleship hung silent in the upper atmosphere, its lights dim, the only sign of life the slow blink of its navigation beacons. Elias knew the next move was already in motion, and this time it might not be stopped. In 3 minutes, in the highest chamber of the Galactic Council building, the walls were made of dark crystal that caught the faint red glow of Velkar Prime's sun and reflected it like dying embers. A long curved table dominated the room, every seat filled by alien leaders whose voices were low but sharp as blades. The war was over on paper, but the debate here was about something else: whether humanity had a place in the galaxy. At Captain Elias Ward stood in the shadows along the far wall, the light barely touching his face. The Council had not called him to speak. They thought he was here as Varnick's guard again, but he had no interest in titles or seating arrangements. He was listening. Every word spoken fed him more than 1,000 reports ever could. The Velkar spoke of humans as unpredictable, too dangerous to trust. The Drune called them reckless opportunists whose victory was nothing but a lucky strike. Even a few neutral worlds questioned why the Council allowed humans to hold positions of influence. Evnik defended him with careful words, speaking of adaptability, of decisive action, of ending a war in less time than it took for a Council vote. But Elias could see the way the others shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the idea that a single human could hold that much sway in events this large. They didn't want to admit it, but they feared him, and fear in politics was more dangerous than hate. Motion passed quietly to begin a review of human security clearances, a slow step toward pushing humanity to the margins again. It was framed as a procedural check, but Elias heard the truth in the careful phrasing. They wanted him, and others like him, off the board before the next storm broke. When the session ended, the leaders left in groups, speaking in low voices, glancing his way without making eye contact. Varnick lingered at the table, his expression unreadable. As the chamber emptied, Elias stepped forward, and the diplomat's voice dropped low. "You heard enough." Elias nodded. "More than enough." Their scared Varnick's gaze flicked toward the door. "Good. Then they'll be predictably." Elias said nothing more. He left the Council chamber and descended the quiet stairways to the lower docking bays, where the air smelled of fuel and metal. A small stealth transport waited, its engines warm. A single travel case sat inside with only the essentials. He stepped aboard and sealed the hatch. The pilot was already at the controls, waiting for coordinates. Before giving them, Elias opened the case and checked the compact set of encrypted data modules, each one containing fragments of intercepted transmissions from the hidden third faction. The pieces didn't form a whole yet, but they were enough to point him toward their next move, a move that could turn the galaxy upside down again. As the transport lifted from the bay, the lights of Velkar Prime spread out below him, fading into the clouds. The war he had ended in 3 minutes was already being rewritten by those who had never seen the battlefield. The real fight was still ahead, and this one would not have an audience. He leaned back in his seat, eyes on the dark horizon, and thought not about what had been won, but about what was coming next, because he knew they were already moving, and so was he.